I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
We're back in our lovely homes, back on Zoom. Still just thinking about last week's draft events, seeing you, kicking it with everybody at the SDPN fan event. It was a great time, man. I'm only now coming down from the high of it, man. It was so cool.
Are you having like the feeling you have after summer camp and you're kind of depressed and sad for all the friends that like blew through town and they're all gone?
I don't know if that's how I would describe it. I kind of look at it as I'm happy and grateful that I got to experience it. I'm happy that I got to see everyone and hug everybody, because I could have easily been in a situation where it didn't happen, but it happened. So I'm happy about it. I'll miss everybody, but I'm not sad about it.
I got it. Well, in case everyone didn't do enough damage at this draft, the fact that the next draft's in Nashville only means. So the 2003 draft was in Nashville. It's a legendary draft, obviously, because it might be, it's in the conversation for the best ever, just in terms of the quality of players. And as a little before my time as a reporter, traveling to those sort of events, but from what I've heard secondhand, that was like the drunkest draft in NHL history. And, and the beauty about it, when you think about it, is like there were so many good players in that draft, you almost couldn't make a mistake. So even if you were a little bit not at your best at the drafting table, you just had to throw a dart and hit any name. I mean, was Patrice Bergeron a second rounder in that draft? I think Joel Pavelski, was he even like the seventh round of that draft? Anyway, point is Hall of Fame quality players were taken right throughout it. So anyway, the bar will be set pretty high for 2023, and it's supposed to be a good draft too. So maybe there's going to be some echoes of 20 years prior when we get to Nashville a year from now.
Funny you say that, because growing up in Montreal, one thing I've seen a lot of Canadiens fans do is go back to the 2003 draft and look at all those Hall of Famers and be like, why didn't we get any of them? I don't even know if you remember who the Canadiens picked in that draft.
I don't.
Andre Kostitsyn. Do you remember the name Andre Kostitsyn?
Of course. Well, I mean, he and his brother both had reasonable careers, but they didn't have Hall of Fame level careers, of course. But where was he picked? Like 15th or something? Like
10th, like somewhere like pretty high up.
Because the truth is like, I think we do a bad job of evaluating this, but someone picked 10 or 15. Like I don't have Kostitsyn's numbers in front of me, but he had like the kind of career that actually most of those players have. Now, of course, sometimes guys that get picked 15th though become all-time greats in the league. Like but already by the time you get to the 10 to 15 range, it's getting to be a little bit more of a crapshoot. If you look historically, about the only guarantee is the top three picks more or less all have great careers. I know we can go through and pick out a few exceptions. That's not my interest in doing that. But in general, picks you're making in the top three become impactful players. And then everything beyond that is a sliding scale of that becoming less likely.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I mean, the benefit of hindsight is always going to come in. And maybe you could make the argument too with Kostitsyn's career that if it weren't for the changes at the lockout, that maybe he might have still had better numbers, and then just maybe something would have gone different. But you know what? That could always be applied like for anything, I guess. But it is just funny that that draft is so studded. And the Canadiens still ended up getting one of those players out of that draft in Shea Weber, who was also a second round pick. But a lot of people like to go back in Montreal on that draft and just, a face palm for that.
Right.
It's funny.
Well, the one name that jumps out the most, I think, is Hugh Jessamine was the Rangers pick. And I know he ended up playing a couple games. That entire first round played NHL games, which does not happen. But he was the one who probably had the least impact at the NHL level among the first rounders that year.
There was one player, I don't know if it was him, but there was another guy who ended up even like becoming like an actor after the fact. I'm going to have to double check that for myself. But anyway, we don't have to rehash the entirety of the 2003 draft. Unless we want to do that, like for like a future episode before the first season is over, like but get a slow day.
What we should do is before we move on to the news of the day, though, we should not move past that event we had at the Bell Center on Friday night, because that was in La Cage, adjacent to the Bell Center. that was pretty cool to see so many people come out and want to meet us and have a drink and take some photos and have some chats. I mean, that was heartwarming. Honestly, I came away from that just feeling amazing. What a way for me, that was the end of my work week, quote unquote, there. And it was just a perfect cherry on the top of, a great draft week. And if you're listening or watching us and you were there, thank you for being loyal to us and believing in what we're doing, because that kind of, it sounds weird, but like reinforced like the whole point of this whole season, Julian. Like we're winding down on the hockey season itself. We're winding down on our first season here on the CJ show. And I'm just filled with gratitude that people have actually made this. We got past like 5 episodes. I think the average podcast doesn't get past like episode 10. So we've sustained it, and it's only because people have been listening and watching that's made it work.
I think the fact that we had people from Montreal, from Toronto, from Ottawa.
Coburg.
I was talking to someone who was coming from Ohio, and their partner was from France, Carolina, like Alberta. Like we had people coming from
Victoria
all
too.
over. Yeah, we had people coming from all over who were at La Cage, and they wanted to meet us, have conversations with us, take photos with us, have us autograph their jerseys and pucks. Like that was I didn't expect that. I honestly didn't. I kind of thought we'd just all be just talking with each other, but like I didn't expect the love. That was really cool.
Yeah, and literally a young couple from Coburg / Coburg. I just want to bring up Coburg.
Of course you should bring up Coburg.
And of course, the great thing about a draft in Montreal is I could stop in Coburg on the way to and from to see my dad. So that was nice too. Do you know what my most humbling moment of draft week was?
Tell me.
Humbling / strange. So I was at the Sheridan, which is across the street for those who don't know, from the Bell Center. So a lot of, that's where a lot of activity was based prior to the days the draft started. And like a kid stops me. He's like, "Can I have your autograph?"
Wow.
I was like, and I'm sort of like looking at him and like, yeah, but like, are you sure? And then he has this puck, right, and a marker, and it's a Bruins puck. And I was like a little bit hesitant. I'm like, "Are you sure you want me to sign this?" He's like, "Yeah. Can you put ass kicker on it?" And I was
ass kicker?
Yeah, I think that's what he said. And I was so confused. I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about, man." And he goes, "Are you PJ Stock?"
You got confused for PJ Stock?
Yeah. And then upon finding out that I was not PJ Stock, he did not need me to sign his Bruins puck. So
that's I don't see the resemblance.
It's a true story. It's funny because I actually ended up telling my dad about this when I saw him on my way back to Toronto, and he like called up a picture online. He's like, "I could kind of see it, but that is a first. I've never, I know PJ a little bit socially, but I've never been confused for him that I know of until that moment." So I hope that doesn't insult you, PJ, but it was a pretty funny moment for me in the time. I was so confused. Like, why does this guy want my autograph? Like, you get the odd selfie request, but I was like, there's no value to my autograph. Even if I put it on a check, like it's going to bounce. Like, what the heck?
Hey, I mean, if it was an older person, I would understand. Maybe they want the autograph of the guy who scored 3 goals in 21 seconds that one time when they were before 10.
Right. Imagine he had like a Coburg Minor hockey puck. That would have been amazing.
Wow. But, that's a deep cut. That you would have had deep fans for that. That's crazy.
Yeah. But I was like, I'm pretty sure you don't want some slub reporter's autograph on a Bruins puck. I mean, that doesn't make sense.
No. We are going to get to a lot of news of the day. We're going to update the CJ's Big Board. We're going to talk about Chicago and what's been going on with them these last few days, with who they're keeping, who they're not keeping, it looks like. I do want to, before we bring on David Bastel and Sports Interaction, though, with the draft, and we'll also talk about Kent Hughes and the moves he did in a bit more detail as well. But in terms of the actual excitement around the draft and into the draft and all the events that happen, where would you rank that in terms of drafts you've seen? Just because with everyone in the crowd and the trades that happened at the beginning of it, like I thought it was the most exciting draft I've seen as long as I've been following the league. And I'm curious, like, where that ranks for you.
It's right near the top. My first draft was 2008 in Ottawa, and I basically did everyone since. I think I might have missed one in there at some point, but I mean, I've basically been doing it for 14, 15 years of drafts. The only thing I could think of as equivalent is I remember being on the draft floor in New Jersey when they traded for Corey Schneider in the first round, and it was in New Jersey, and the way Gary Bettman's like, I got a trade to announce and you're going to like this or something like that. Like he had like a sort of a wrestling promotion vibe to it, the way he announced that trade. That was pretty buzzy, but I have to think this is at the top. Montreal's such a great hockey city. The friggin' league was founded 2 blocks from the Bell Center over 100 years ago. And, for them to have the first overall pick, to also make a significant trade in the early part of that draft, draft is it's a buzzy event in terms of what we talk about and some of the trades that go down. But when you're in the building, it takes a long time. The first round, I don't know, was that 4 hours almost, or 3 to 4 hours anyway?
Yeah. It was
it's long. Like as a fan, other than the fact that you can literally see, if you want to meet your heroes, it's a great opportunity to do that. Cause I looked on that draft floor, like this was crazy for me. Like I was having I had a moment there. I was looking out on the draft floor at one point. You see Rick Nash, part of the Columbus table. You see Jason Spezza there. Obviously guys like Steve Yzerman and Joe Sakic are GMs. And I remember, watching them play. Scott Niedermayer was walking around. Like it was sort of wild to see all the former players on the draft floor and all that. So, put it this way. It's not normally a really spectator-friendly event, except for the people watching and a chance to meet people and all that. But the first hour on Thursday night was pretty cool. You had sort of the hype of who was going to be picked. There was decidedly mixed reaction when they did pick Juraj Slafkovsky. Like there was some people, I'm not sure they were booing, but almost going like, ooh, like, and then obviously some people cheering, and then they make the Kirby Dach deal. That was fun. And let's face it, I had 2 hot dogs both days. So it was a pretty good day. It was a pretty successful trip to the Bell Center.
Actually, I don't think I had a hot dog at all while I was at the Bell Center, and that never happens. I always try to have at least like a few. I don't know why I did, but anyway.
I was going to say the novelty might not be there when you go as often as you go, Julian, but for visiting not just media people, like visiting teams, visiting GMs, visiting coaches, like it is a genuine thing, like that you want to have those. There's just something special about those hot dogs. I don't know why.
The Shane Show, man. I don't know what it is either. It just works.
It's the buns. I don't know how they do those buns, but there's a unique bun composition there if you haven't ever had one.
Yeah, well, everyone who's listening to this podcast, if you ever get a chance, get yourself a hot dog when you're in Montreal. All right, let's bring on David Bastel from Sports Interaction. 19 plus if you're playing Sports Interaction, by the way. Play responsibly. There will be a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of this show. Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. David Bastel is here with us, of course. So remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. David, I'm going to let you in on an inside joke that happens. Not happens, but we've talked about at different points on this show. And a lot of people are still trying to figure out what this is. If you were a betting man, which of course you are, what would you think Jeff Carter's middle name is?
Jeff James Carter.
Okay. All right, cool. So I don't know if Sports Interaction is going to ever put that up on what Jeff Carter's middle name is going to be. We're going to try to reveal that before the end of the season because one of us three apparently knows what it is. You can make a wild guess about who that is. But I'm glad that we have your guess on record. We'll try to get more guesses.
You know what? And obviously, totally off the top of my mind. Totally. It could be Robert. It could be Jonathan. It could be Dave, Chris, Julian. So I'm going to go with James. Yep.
I'm just being a jerk and putting pressure on CJ. Let's talk about who's going to win the cup next year.
Usually one of our listeners / viewers wants to hear this. So, that's the strange part.
You have to give the people what they want, CJ. And at least for this next part here, a lot of people are wondering who's going to win the Stanley Cup next year. And the betting favorite right now is the guys who just won it, the Colorado Avalanche.
Which makes a lot of sense, right? Because they are the defending champs. You see that a lot with any sort of sport. Whoever holds the trophy at the end of the year, usually a heavy favorite, or at least the favorite walking into the next season. And of course, lots of work to be done in these next couple of months before we break training camp and so forth. But the crazy part is, according to our numbers at Sports Interaction, the odds-on favorite for a Stanley Cup final, and I'd love to get your take on this, guys. And I know a lot of it has to do with public teams and so forth, but it would be an Avalanche Toronto Maple Leaf final based on the numbers right now, CJ. And yes, it's the Leafs, very public team. There are a couple of backers out there that seem to want this to happen every single year.
Well, it would have been a great final this year, I think, just with the way the teams were built. It's hard to know, though. The goaltending to me would be the one thing that would give me pause before, making that bet at this point in time, just because, look, even Colorado going with Alexander Georgiev and letting Kemper walk is a decision that will define their season to some degree next year. And we still don't know who's going to be a net 100% for the Leafs. I mean, certainly a few names out there, but I don't know if they're bringing in one new guy, two new guys. I'd want to know that before, putting anything too significant on the line.
I just want to know why you're giving people false hope, DB, with the idea of the Leafs go to the final against Colorado. I'm just kidding.
It's what I do.
Just kidding. Also,
so Maple Leafs part of that conversation. The I guess the odd thing that's happened since the Stanley Cup was awarded, the Flames have actually jumped the Edmonton Oilers as far as numbers are concerned. So now the Flames are actually Canada's number 2 team, followed by the Edmonton Oilers in that order, top 3. So nothing overly significant, but I guess when they're breaking down rosters, there seems to be a little more money on the Calgary Flames.
That's interesting, considering we still don't know if Johnny Gaudreau will return to the franchise. I know you guys will
piece, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, pretty big. And I know you guys will eventually have, you guys are looking at getting stuff on who could be going where when it comes to free agency. As we know, a free agency day starts on Wednesday, DB.
Yep, coming up. Should be a lot of fun. And yes, it's will probably be part of the mix in some sort as far as where teams are going to go with their money. And there's some significant players as well that I'm sure that you guys are going to be talking about this whole week and where those destinations will end up.
Yep, that's what we're going to do, because that's what we do on the CJ Show. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. David Bastel, we will talk to you very soon.
Thanks, fellas.
Gotta love the fact that David Bastel was willing to play along with the Jeff Carter joke that we started on this podcast. I like his guess, James.
He didn't miss a beat either. Like, if you had asked me that blindly, because he was not aware of the sort of the gag or the what's gone on in our whole season with that particular question, he didn't miss a beat. He just jumped right into that thing.
Telling you, man, that just goes to show all the pros who end up on this show. We'll get you all that name in due time. But anyway, before we get to that, want to talk a little bit more about some of the GMs who made some moves over the last how many days. Kent Hughes, we kind of touched off on it a little bit with the fact that he was able to get Uri Slafkovsky first overall, and they trade for Kirby Dach. Like, a lot of people in Montreal are still trying to make sense of all of it. A lot of people are wondering if Shane Wright should have been the pick. People are wondering if he actually stared down the Canadiens management after he got picked. Oh, he's not going to be a Montreal Canadien, at least for the foreseeable future. They have decided to go with the scoring winger and Kirby Dach potentially as a future number 2 or number 3 center for the Montreal Canadiens. What did you think of all those moves?
Well, look, I'm not a prospect expert, and I don't even want to pretend for a moment I am. So I don't have a strong
Neither
opinion,
of us are.
But I don't have a strong opinion on the pick. I do think clearly that if you think Slafkovsky is going to be the best talent in the draft, you take him. And there's still kind of a nod to the positional requirements of the organization to then be able to go get Kirby Dach. And what I like about it, at least on paper, is Kirby Dach is going to be in the same generation of what they're hoping for, the Cole Caulfields, the Nick Suzuki's, the next players that the Canadiens want to build around. He's in the right age band. And I think that's important because his career is not taken off maybe the way the Blackhawks had hoped. He's had some injury issues. There's it's been a pandemic. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's gone on. But I think it was a creative way to sort of quote unquote address the problem or the need. And 100%, if you're scouts, if you do your due diligence, like I don't think you draft for positional need at the top of the draft. You have to come out with the best player, full stop. I don't care if he plays wing. It does address another need that I didn't see a ton of people talk about. Like, the Canadiens need some size. And, Uri Slafkovsky might not play center, but he's big. And I think that is worth something. I know that sometimes drafting for size has led teams down the wrong directions, but in general, you go with the best guy. That's what they did, and they still found a way to get their center. So I think it's logical, the decisions they made, but you're still betting on kids. You're still betting on young men in the case of Kirby Dach. And so I don't know if it's all going to turn out great or not yet, but the process there appears to have been, worth celebrating or worth saying, hey, these guys did the right thing.
Yeah. And then another reason why a lot of people are talking about it, I should have mentioned him off top too, the Canadiens end up parting with Alexander Romanov, another young defenseman, a puck-moving defenseman, who goes off to the New York Islanders as a result of all the hustling and the bustling that goes around. So this is a really interesting time with this team as they're already in this transitional period and going into a new era. But it just made the events, at least, very interesting to process. I'm not a prospects guy either. If the Canadiens think Juraj Slafkovsky is the guy, he will have to prove it to them. And at least the way he reacted to everybody either giving him praise or kind of booing him or doing like the hose, he seemed to have taken that move in stride. But I mean, I think you kind of need that attitude to kind of be in this city. And I think that's what stuck out to me most, is the fact that he's taken that in stride.
Well, he's a big personality. Like, I think Canadiens fans are going to fall in love with this guy. Whether he turns out to be the absolute best player in this draft, I mean, we're going to need 5 to 10 years to evaluate that. But just off the hop, I mean, he scores goals, he produces wow moments, and he's a giant lovable kid, it seems like. So I think that it's going to be a player that the Canadiens fans are going to rally around. I mean, I saw you were in the rink too, Julian. I mean, there's lots of people with Shane Wright signs and T-shirts, so that I'm sure Canadiens fans would have loved him as well. And maybe this will all work out quite well. I think Shane Wright, you don't like dropping the way he did. I'm sure that was like a long 15 minutes of time to sit through those other picks. But, he ends up in a franchise run by Ron Francis, one of the best two-way centermen in NHL history, team that already has Matty Beniers to play up the middle. I mean, Seattle might being a blessing in disguise for Shane Wright in terms of his fit there and who he's around and all those things. I mean, these things do tend to work out. But I'm excited to see Slafkovsky in Montreal, and I think he'll play next year. From all indications, he's played with men already over in Europe. We saw what he did at the Olympics and the Men's World Hockey Championship in May. He's proven that he can make an impact in those types of games. And so he's probably ready to jump in. And I think where Montreal is going to be at in terms of not, being a high competitive team next season, we're going to get to watch him right away. And I think he's going to score some goals that bring you out of your seats. I think that's worth something. I mean, that's kind of part of the debate here, right? I think Shane Wright seems to be the sort of player that is very conscientious two-way player, maybe does a lot of things that don't necessarily generate excitement, but help teams win games. Slafkovsky appears to be a bit more of a showman, a bit more of a wow moment kind of guy, someone you can sell, and someone who also does things that help you can win games, because ultimately scoring is the hardest thing to do in the sport.
And if you really think about it, in the DNA of the Montreal Canadiens, it's about scoring goals and having that showy flair attitude. And it has been missing. It's been lacking for the better part of a decade plus.
Well, I mean, their team has been built around Carey Price in a lot of ways, right? And the blue line. I know PK Subban brought a certain flair, but ultimately what has betrayed this team when it's, if you look at its most recent incarnations that were good, and I almost am excluding that 2021 run to the Cup because it's just like there's some weirdness there. But like in the middle part of the 2010s, the Canadiens were consistently a good team. They won lots of playoff rounds. They got to an Eastern Conference final. It felt like in the big moments they didn't score enough quite to get over the hump, right? Especially the points when Carey Price was healthy and the best goaltender in the game or one of the best goaltenders in the game, just felt like they didn't have enough offense. Well, maybe this next generation will be built a little different way because Cole Caulfield scores goals. There's still going to be more players added to this team through their rebuild. And, I think it's going to be probably built in a different manner. I think they're going to be exciting is what they're hoping to be. And you need some lottery luck for that too. And so I think the 2023 draft pick for the Canadiens is going to be important. They got an additional unprotected 2023 pick, first rounder from Florida in that deal for Ben Sherratt. And so the cupboard is just starting to be restocked, and who knows, maybe next year they're picking first again. And then you're going to have a really fun, exciting offensive team.
I'll move from Kent Hughes to Kyle Davidson. I think it's a pretty easy transition there because he offloads Kirby Dach. He also offloads Alex DeBrincat to the Ottawa Senators. And yesterday on Sunday, we learned that he's not going to give a qualifying offer to one of his better centers in Dylan Strome. What the hell is going on in Chicago? I mean, actually, not even what the hell is going on in Chicago. They are tanking for Connor Bedard, and it has never been more blatant. But it just seems as if like there's like a lack of proper asset management in terms of actual futures they could get for these pieces. Like it's a bit surprising to me.
Well, look, they are 100% tearing it to the studs, and I think the problem is, look, you make the decision to not. I mean, the issue with Alex DeBrincat is just he's going to cost big money beyond next season. And clearly they weren't comfortable committing that kind of money to him and making him part of their next core. You know, he also has to agree to that too. I mean, it's entirely possible that he wasn't going to want to stick around and sign a 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 year deal, given, you know, where it appears that the immediate future of the organization is. And then, so if you're trading him in the moment, he's only worth what the market says he's worth. Like, lots of people love a 24-year-old who can score 40 goals. But there's just not that many NHL teams that could make that deal, that had a first-round pick in this draft and like in the high top 10, that had the cap space to bring him in now and can hope to sign him as well. And so you're dealing with a limited market, and I think that's why the return might have been underwhelming to some. But it's the conditions of the time. You know, ultimately the Blackhawks determined that this was the best moment to trade him, that this was when the asset would be at its most valuable, and you make the deal in front of you. You know, the Blackhawks went from having no first round picks in this draft to making 3, because they also picked up a late first rounder by taking on Peter Mrazek's contract from the Leafs. And so they've started to rebuild, and it's going to be painful. Like, you need players. The odd team, I guess, if they do finish last this season or near the bottom and end up getting Bedard, maybe it's a quicker bounce back. But I think reasonably, you know, they just don't have a lot of assets. You know, they're letting Dominic Kubalik go as well. You know, they're just unapologetically ripping it apart. And so, you know, we'll see how that goes for them. It is a plan. You know what I mean? Like, I can't, sometimes being stuck in the middle is no good for a franchise either. And they've kind of been in the middle, I think, these last couple of years. I know they've sunk more to the bottom, specifically this last season or two, but you know, I can understand to some degree how you get there, and we've seen other teams try it, but there is no guarantee. You might correct me if I'm wrong here. I think if you finish last, you have an 18% chance of drafting first. And so, I mean, I guess if you finish last, you know, you're going to draft no worse than third, which is worth something. But, you know, there's just no guarantee you're going to get a great player at that spot. I know it's meant to be a good draft, but it's a bit of a risky strategy. But I guess they're taking the position that it would be riskier to just kind of hum along and not have a clearly defined plan. And you know, now we see what happens with you know, Patrick Kane in particular, but also Jonathan Toews moving forward, because I mean, they're not just ripping apart the old guys on that team. Like, they've sent Brandon Hagel out of the trade deadline, plus the DeBrincat. And you have to think there'll be more moves of that nature heading into this year's trade deadline.
Yeah, that's what makes this so jarring. It's the fact that it's the young players that they're getting rid of, either for what people might deem to be lesser offers than expected, or for nothing at all. Like, you'd think for a rebuild, you know, you hang on to some of those players and you move out guys like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews and get what you can get. But even those guys with the contracts that they have, good luck. You're going to at least have to retain some salary, not to mention health is also an issue when it comes to the file of Jonathan Toews. But a 21-year-old center in Kirby Dach, who, yes, he hasn't had the greatest amount of seasons. Chicago saying, you know what, we're done. We're going to offload him. A guy like Alex DeBrincat, who can score 40 goals in his sleep. Yeah, goodbye. You're gone. Dylan Strome, a guy who got along fine with Patrick Kane. You're not even going to keep him on a qualifying offer. You're going to lose him for nothing. Dominic Kubalik, you just mentioned, they're going to let him go. It's the pieces and the ages of those players that seem to be very jarring. Even if a rebuild is absolutely necessary, it's also just a straight up blatant ploy, not ploy, but just move to try to get this top pick. And you're absolutely right. Like, you only have, like, even if it's 18% chance at getting the number 1 overall pick, there's also still an 88% chance you don't get that first overall pick. But yes, a lot of people are also going to say, if you finish last, you're guaranteed a top 3 pick. That's what a lot of people in Chicago and in other markets who are going to do the same thing are going to be saying a lot of, because if you don't get Connor Bedard, Matvei Michkov is out there. Adam Fantilli is also out there. There's going to be a lot of that next year.
It's a full reset for Chicago, right? I mean, the only player that we could be pretty confident will be there, I think, is Seth Jones. I just think it'd be very difficult to move that contract, which is just starting now, right? Like the 8 years that the clock has just gotten going on that. But, you know, it's a complete reset of the organization. That's the only way to look at it. And it's crazy because it was only last summer they were trading a first-round pick and signing Seth Jones. So, you know, this is a pretty abrupt, turn in a different direction. Now it's a different GM. Clearly, there's been some big changes in that organization for the off-ice stuff that happened. So, I just think it's a complete fresh restart. And I don't think we should expect them to be competitive anytime in the next couple of years. I mean, it might happen. It might happen to hit on the right guys, and those players might be good enough to immediately turn them around. The one team I can think of doing that is, the Maple Leafs drafted Austin Matthews in 2016, first overall, and ended up making the playoffs the next year. It helped, though, that they had Mitch Marner already in the cooker from the previous draft and William Nylander from 2 drafts prior to that. And all those guys came up at the same time and were probably a little more impactful than you can count on 18 and 19-year-olds being, just the way it turned out. But, in general, it takes a few years of being lost at sea. And then sometimes you become Buffalo or Edmonton, which had many, many years and many, many high picks, and it didn't make a big difference. So there's risk involved with it. I saw Mark Lazarus at The Athletic ripped into the Blackhawks pretty good with a column here on Monday. He's just against the idea of tanking in general. I'm not as opposed to it, because ultimately I get that it's ugly business, but you don't want to, you either have to sell, you're cheering for winning or you're cheering for the chance to win. Like, I think sometimes when organizations don't execute a plan and you're just like, what are they doing all the time? That's hard as a fan. This is business at the end of the day. They're making business decisions. They're trying to work the CBA and the draft lottery rules in their favor. They're trying to bounce back quicker and shoot higher than ever before. So I can understand the plan. I just think it would be silly for us not to acknowledge it carries massive risk. Like they just might have bad draft lottery luck, draft the wrong players, and you're wasting entire seasons then for what? And it makes them a team to watch. I mean, look where Arizona's at. They're in a similar type of spot. I mean, they're still a bit of a dumping ground team for contracts. They've obviously amassed a huge number of draft picks. Their plan is meant to be similar. They're clearly trying to just have this next wild generation, but you got to hit on your picks to make that work.
100%. By the way, the Mark Lazarus column that CJ is referencing, Blackhawks' blatant tank job is bold but utterly contemptible. You can find that on the Athletic website. Very quickly before we get to the big board, you mentioned Arizona here. A lot of people have noticed that their schedule, not only is it out, but it seems to be pretty light on some of the home games, or a lot of, at least in the first part of this coming NHL season. Just going to read this tweet off from Frank Saravalli's Twitter. 20 of their first 24 games are on the road. They play just 2 home games in each of October and November. There's no Saturday night home game during the NCAA season. Of course, they play at Arizona State's rink. One Saturday in December during Christmas break. What are your thoughts on the schedule? And also, are you actually excited about visiting that rink in Arizona?
I am excited. I think it's going to be kind of cool. I look at the criticism that's out there, that's justified. I understand where it comes from, but now the decision's made. They're playing there next season and for the next couple of seasons. I think it has 13 rows is the entire, stadium essentially, and then obviously stuff at the top. But it'll be an unmatched sort of viewing opportunity to watch an NHL game. So that can be true, but I think we can also say, like, look, this is a really difficult spot to be in for those players. My understanding is they didn't want to have a situation like the Islanders had to start this year when they were waiting for their arena to open, where it's all one massive road trip. So I think those 4 home games come in a block together. So basically the player, you do get home for a stretch, but even at that time, they're going to have to use some temporary kind of facilities because, right now they're still building out the proper dressing room and facilities adjacent to this arena. Look, this is making the best of a not ideal situation is what they're doing. It's a brand new rink for ASU. So, at least the facility itself, while not at the size and scale of what you'd expect an NHL arena to be. At least it's new. It's not like they're going into a 50-year-old barn to play, which I actually think is worthy of note. And I do think that I think it'll be a good atmosphere, quite honestly. But it's going to be a little strange. And that's not a schedule that's conducive to much success. I think just playing that long on the road is just a human toll. Being on the road that long is tough, and being away from family or friends or what have you. So yeah, it is what it is. I think that the road heavy start is really just about getting all the facilities built there more than anything else. By the following season, I think they'll have a normal, what we would call a normal looking schedule, but it's taking chickens, whatever. It's making chicken soup out of the situation.
I was about to say, where were you going with that chicken analogy?
I didn't want to swear too much. I know I dropped the odd swear on here, but I'm trying to be better.
Oh, wow. You know what? That's just growth from you, CJ. And we are all about growth here on the Chris Johnston Show. Let's get to the big board. A couple episodes ago, we introduced CJ's big UFA big board with some of the best and most available free agents that could be available coming on Wednesday. We put together a little bit of a board for you guys to see who are among the top, according to CJ, David Perron and Vincent Trocheck just outside the top 10. But just from 10 on down, Andre Palat entering the top 10 at 10, Valerian Chuskin at 9, Evander Kane at 8, John Klingberg at 7, Jack Campbell at 6, Claude Giroud at 5, Patrice Bergeron at 4, Evgeny Malkin at 3, Nazem Kadri at 2, Johnny Gaudreau still leading atop CJ's big board of unrestricted free agents.
Shout out producer Nick for the graphic too. Love it.
Producer Nick, man, he knows a thing or two about putting these things together. You'll notice Philip Forsberg is no longer on this list. He just re-upped with the Nashville Predators. I think you had him third on the previous iteration of this list, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, and Chris Letang is off it too. He was in the top 5. So, you get a couple signings. What's funny is, a couple of these players might still be signed out of the top 10 and not actually reach free agency on Wednesday at noon Eastern time. I think Evgeny Malkin and the Penguins have made some progress towards a deal, not quite there yet, but, could see that happening before Wednesday. Patrice Bergeron, I just have him that high because if he's unsigned as of Wednesday, teams are 100% going to call his agent and at least see what they can do. But we're very upfront about this. I don't expect him to test the market in the way these other players will. I don't think he's trying to drive up his price or interested in playing anywhere else. If he plays, I would almost certain it's going to be in Boston. The rest though should probably hold to this point. I don't see a Gaudreau extension coming. There's one important deadline that you might not be aware of, Julian, though, is he can only sign an 8-year deal in Calgary until 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday night. That is 12 hours before free agency officially opens. And that 8th year is, a huge advantage for Calgary. It's significant money and it could be something that helps, sway him back towards the Flames. That deadline bears watching, I guess, as it approaches. But yeah, this is what we got. I think there's quite a few interesting names here. And, certainly this top 10, these guys by and large are going to get paid.
What about names like Claude Giroux and Jack Campbell? Or let's try to at least, if we can get a sense of what's your sense on some of the other guys in that top 10 and where they could be headed or if they could stay with their teams.
Well, Jack Campbell's a big jumper. I don't recall where I had him prior to this, but I know he made a big leap up to 6 on the second version of the big board. It's come down to where it looks like it's Toronto and Edmonton vying for services. Kyle Dubas had a meeting with Jack Campbell over the weekend, trying to get a sense of where he's at, if they can reach a contract. I think the Leafs have circled back here with the way that the goalie market's played out. We've seen Billy Husso come off the board. Marc-Andre Fleury came off the board. There's trades for Alexander Georgiev and Vitek Vanacek over the weekend. There's in this game of musical chairs, there's Jack Campbell's one of the last available pieces you're trying to grab and put in a chair. And so, he's in pretty high demand. So that's where he's at. I still think Edmonton's the favorite on him, but we'll see what happens. The Leafs have exclusive negotiating rights during this period. So there's still time for them to maybe step up with an offer that can convince him to stay. Claude Giroux is an interesting one. It does seem as though he's going to move on from Florida. I think all things being equal, he would have liked to remain a Panther, after playing the last part of the season there last year and into the playoffs. But, they just have cap troubles and I think his ability to earn more money is going to be elsewhere. And, I'm very curious to see if he ends up with the Ottawa Senators. He's got ties to Ottawa. The Senators are of the frame of mind that they want to make a splash. They're engaged in talks on trading Matt Murray. They're looking at potentially moving on from Connor Brown, who's 1 year from UFA. We've already seen them take a big swing by bringing Alex DeBrincat in. Pierre Dorion is shaking up his team, and I think he'd love to try to get Claude Giroud's signature on a contract. And I think he's got a chance. Not a slam dunk. It's not 100% done, nothing like that. But I do think that there's hope of bringing him sort of quote unquote home. I know he's from Hearst, Ontario, proud hometown of my buddy Pierre LeBrun. But Claude does spend his off seasons in the Ottawa area, and I think is open to at least considering what the Senators might put in front of him on Wednesday.
A lot of love for les Franco-Ontariens aujourd'hui on the CJ show. What about Nazem Kadri?
Interesting case. I don't know that the Avalanche can get to where he needs a contract to be. And so, at this point, I do think he's going to be testing the open market. In terms of fits for him, I've talked in the past about Detroit, maybe making some sense. They're looking for help down the middle. If it's not Kadri, I think that they'll look at a player like Vincent Trocheck, for example. I think that they would look at Malkin if he got to free agency. I don't think that's going to happen. But, Andrew Kopp, I would expect Detroit to be a team that's out there signing a player to play down the middle for them. And I think Kadri makes some sense given its proximity to his hometown of London, Ontario. I also wonder about Calgary, Julian. If they end up maybe losing out on Johnny Gaudreau, if they pivot away from that and try to bring in Kadri. I mean, they would have the cap space. I think they would have a spot in the lineup. Remember a couple of years ago, they tried to trade for him from Toronto and didn't complete that deal. But I could see that being a place. We've talked a bit about Seattle, I believe, wanting to make a splash in free agency. So I think that they'll be in play for maybe a player like Kadri. So he's going to have his options, and he's definitely going to get paid. And, at this point in time, it just seems like Colorado probably can't get to the kind of numbers he can expect to see on the open market. And so, I don't necessarily think he'll be back for a chance at a second straight cup with the Avs.
By the way, if you want to see CJ's full big board list, he has updated it for North Star Bets. I believe you've already tweeted out the link out on Twitter. We'll try to find a way to have it out somewhere. We'll definitely try to share that link. But you can find all the different names on that big board on the North Star Bets the North Star Bets website. Sorry, tongue, whatever reason, just got twisted there for a couple seconds. North Star Bets with CJ, the big board of unrestricted free agents available coming later this week.
And we're going to keep updating it. We'll keep it updated because there's a few players. We're recording the show on a Monday. There's a deadline for restricted free agents to be tendered qualifying offers. So might get a couple interesting names that become last minute UFAs here. And then obviously if some of these guys sign, we're going to keep rejigging the order and keeping it fresh.
Exactly. We get jiggy with the list. Let's get to Ask CJ. We do this every Monday where we take in questions from you watching or listening to this episode. You can send in questions over Twitter or over our SDPN Discord. Just use the hashtag AskCJ if you can. I'm going to start with this one from Parmveer Baines on Twitter, who I actually ran into downtown last week, which was kind of interesting. He's like, oh, hey, I know who you are. That's pretty cool. What do we expect from the Habs during UFA season? Do you see them getting rid of contracts to free up cap space to make a run at a big UFA name?
No, I think it's going to be a pretty quiet free agency period for Montreal. I could see them maybe taking a swing to bring Brett Kulak back if he remains unsigned in Edmonton. The Oilers would like to keep Kulak too. They'd like to fit with him. And so, I could see them making that kind of re-addition, it would be in this case, but I don't see them being in play for any of the names in the top 10 or even the top 20 or 30 maybe on the big board. I just think that the cap space is too precious right now. They don't have any clarity on what's happening with Carey Price. If anything, we're probably talking about Montreal unloading a contract or two. And I think by free agency 2023, it's a different picture. And that was a big part of trading Shea Weber's contract as well, is just to preserve flexibility down the road. And so I don't think Montreal will be in on any of the big names. They might make a deal or two here in July. But, by this time next year, will be connecting them to all the big dogs.
From Tyler Gramont, Tyler28 Gramont on Twitter, with Winnipeg shopping Blake Wheeler and rumors of Pierre-Luc Dubois potentially wanting out in the future, is there any chance they go full rebuild and would be open to moving their stars such as Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Connor Hellebuck?
I don't think they're in a mind frame for total rebuild. I mean, look, this year they had trouble selling out their building, which has not been an issue since the team came back up from Atlanta and became Winnipeg Jets 2.0. There's business interests here. They still have a lot of good players too. I think that there's a case to be made that they shouldn't do a rebuild. They're certainly open to moving some things around, and I've worked with Blake Wheeler to see if there's a new home for him. But by bringing in Rick Bowness, a veteran coach, I think that you're seeing signs really that they're just trying to squeeze more out of their group, and might do like some small tinkering. But I wouldn't expect to see a rebuild. I mean, they might have to contemplate that if this doesn't work. But from my view, it's worth giving it another shot. They still have some real difference makers there, and pieces that can be part of an eventual rebuild if they decide to unload them. It's just not going to happen in the immediate future.
Next one from Eric Leon on Twitter. Who's the best UFA that's going to sign a 1-year deal?
Ooh, good question. Maybe Mason Marchment comes to mind. He had a season where it really popped for him in Florida, but he's 27 years old. He hasn't done it on any meaningful level at the NHL prior to this season. And so I could see him taking a short-term deal, kind of a prove-it type of deal. It might end up being 2 years, not one. But I think he will sign a short-term contract. And obviously, if he pops again, if he shows that he can be a top 6 player, then he'll be in a much better position to sign long-term going forward. But by and large, if you're looking at these UFAs, they're signing for term, and so there's not going to be a lot of 1-year deals. I mean, maybe Patrice Bergeron might be a cheat way to give you that answer, because he's probably signing a 1-year contract to return to Boston. I think he's year by year at this point of his career, and he just won his 5th Selke Trophy. So if he signs a 1-year deal, it's going to be hard saying anyone's better than him. But he's not really a true UFA as mentioned previously, because I don't think he's looking for anywhere else to play, but really just deciding where he's at vis-a-vis the Bruins or retiring.
Next one from J. Alexander 46. Is it allowed for Team A to trade player with salary retained to Team B, then have Team B buy out the player's contract and have both teams share the buyout recapture?
Short answer is no. You can't do that. There's all these room. If you trade a player and he gets bought out, I think he can't rejoin your team for a year or something like that. I mean, there's basically mechanisms put in place in the CBA to have it so that you can't circumvent the rules. Although now that I'm remembering, didn't Brooks Orpik get traded to Colorado in the Philip Grubauer deal and then bought out and re-signed in Washington? Maybe. I gotta have to brush up on that. I'm gonna have to brush up on my CBA. I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer to the question, but there are definitely parameters in place to try to make it hard for you to skirt the rules, which I think is what you're trying to get at there with that scenario.
Next one from Medic Burnside on Twitter. I want to know why the Leafs are taking runs at Matt Murray, an injury-prone goalie with a league cap hit and not great recent numbers, after getting rid of basically the same goalie. What's the thought process here? Can't wrap my head around it.
This is a common thought out there among Leafs fans. I've gotten it a bit on my Twitter feed. I think it's as simple as supply and demand. There's not a lot of supply on the market. I'm not sure the Leafs are willing to go to where Jack Campbell's next contract is going to be. And you look around the league, and I know everyone wants to say like John Gibson. Well, as far as I know, the Anaheim Ducks are not trading John Gibson. And it doesn't even sound like the Montreal Canadiens are inclined to move Jake Allen. I mean, they're going to need someone to play net for them next season. And so there aren't a lot of options. Matt Murray is very much available. I think Ottawa is willing to be creative. The acquisition cost is going to be low. Obviously, there's a pretty big sticker price on him in terms of the salary owed and his cap hit, $6.25 million. But I think there's ways for this deal to make sense where you can get him at a reasonable number. And he's got connection to multiple people in the Leafs organization. I mean, everyone points out that he played for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds while Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe were there, and that's true. But, what also happened is the Leafs have a guy by the name of John Elkin who works in their front office in goalie development, and he was literally Matt Murray's childhood goaltending coach. And so they have a deep connection to this guy. They have, presumably some information. I know part of what's happened here over the weekend is the Leafs have, engaged in trade talks with the Senators, is they've gotten access to Matt Murray's medical records to do a full sort of scope of everything he's dealt with. Because I think, the big story of Matt Murray's career has been the injuries more than anything. And that's sort of derailed him from being part of 2 Stanley Cup champions back-to-back with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But he's still under 30. They have a tie to him. The acquisition cost is cheap, and clearly the Leafs believe that they can get him to another level. It's a gigantic risk. I think that there's no getting around that fact. But, it's also a risk to give Jack Campbell a 5-year deal. And so that's what the decision boils down to. What I don't have a clear picture on as we're recording this, Julian, is are they getting Matt Murray and another proven NHL goalie, or is it literally going to be Matt Murray with Eric Källgren or Joseph Woll as his backup, players that are already in the Leafs organization? It's going to be an interesting call. I think no matter how it shakes down with the Leafs cap situation, they're not going with sure things. But, maybe it pays off. Maybe they get a reborn Matt Murray at a fraction of the cost and they look like geniuses. If not, they're probably making a trade in season next year to upgrade that position because, there's just not a sure thing out there for them, at least not that I see.
Last one from Carpoulin on Twitter. A very serious question for you, CJ. Which bar was the most popular last week in Montreal?
Ziggy's. It's always
easily.
It's a great hockey bar. I'd urge fans to go there, especially if you're there at a big event. But, I was there Friday night, Julian. I know you were there. It was popping, and it was a lot of hockey people. It was almost exclusively hockey people. And so that was probably the most popular. Hurley's is popular. I know that some of the youngins went to, was it called Astral 2000? Was that where the...
L'Astral 2000. That's where we went karaokeing one of the nights last week, yes.
Yeah, so I didn't get to Astral 2000 or L'Astral 2000, but I know that was popular with some of the youngins. But Ziggy's probably took the cake last week.
Yeah, Ziggy's, Hurley's, Winnie's was also pretty popular. Chez Alexandre, I saw a few people there. L'Astral for sure. That was also like a further out east from downtown, but very much worth it to see John Liu sing and Greg Wyshynski sing All the Small Things as well for karaoke. A lot of guys, a lot of people would have gone. If you would have gone, what would have been your go-to karaoke song? I
would not have done karaoke.
Come on.
I'm all up for a good time, but I know my limitations too. And I don't think I've almost never sang karaoke in my life, maybe a handful of times in my 20s, but I'm not a big karaoke performer.
You should do it. I think it's so fun because like no one expects anyone in the room to do it. And then if you muster up the courage to do it, it's such like a liberating and free thing. Like everyone's not going to expect you to fail. Like it's fun.
I've got a range though, like with this whiskey and cigarettes voice of mine, I can't do too many. I need specific songs that are kept within a certain range to even have a chance.
Okay, like Lou Rawls. Trying to think of people with Johnny Cash. You could probably do like
but I couldn't match Johnny Cash. I mean, that's tough.
I mean, no one's gonna ask you to be Johnny Cash and do Ring of Fire and expect you to be the second coming.
I came in a burning ring of fire. I don't know all the lyrics.
You could do it. Next time we come to Toronto, we go to a karaoke bar. We doing it.
All right. We're going to have a bet on that. And I'm going to have to lose the bet to have to do karaoke. We'll come up with a new bet after, I owe you one after that cup final bet I lost.
All right. Well, season 2, we'll put that in. By the way, for people wondering if I sang, I did. Met with Matt Larkin of the Hockey News. We did a duet of Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. Exactly. It was fun. It was cool. That was the first time I'd ever met Matt too. We will always have that bond forever. That's another thing about these things too. You could end up doing it with some random dude you had only met for the first time that night, and you could have that bond for the rest of your life, knowing that you found a way to not look like a fool doing karaoke. But anyway, that's going to do it for the Monday edition of the CJ Show. Siege, always a pleasure doing these shows with you, bud. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. Check out all the other fun stuff at the SDPN and be on the lookout for the updated big board, CJ.
By Thursday, I'm going to be in vacation CJ mode, so just be prepared for a weird show.
Sunglasses?
I'm not even saying yet, but I'm just saying, like, this has been a long stretch. I love my job, obviously. Appreciate you all, but I'm ready for a break. And Thursday is about the start of my break. So,
okay. All right. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Peace. Talk to you guys on Thursday.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.